I'm about to make a statement. If you hate it, that's okay, but I actually mean it, and that's important. I absolutely despise the New Age movement, the white lighter crystals, sniff incense, and sit on cushions and, line your line your special, your sacred area with little brass statues. I'm completely opposed to the New Age movement and everything that falls with it. However, unfortunately, like a broken clock, which is right twice a day, there's one thing that they've actually adhered to early on, and it was not the proposition of the New Agers. However, the New Agers have embraced it wholeheartedly, at least by and large. And I never would have thought it was true, but as a hardcore Platonic, Neoplatonic, or monistic truth seeker, it turns out to be absolutely undeniably true, and all evidence says that it is absolutely and explicitly undeniable, and that is that the universe is holographic. And as an expert in magnetism, which I can easily say that without being egotistical, magnetism, of course, is the principle of a divergent field. Magnetism is, by definition, the dielectric field. However, the two are the conjugate geometries of the universe, specifically to the hyperboloid and the torus. The torus, of course, is the geometry of magnetism. Magnetism, of course, is a three-dimensional S-curve. Specifically, all force vectors are three-dimensional S-curves. And magnetism, of course, extrapolates out the interior geometry of the torus, or the donut shape. And a three-dimensional S-curve, you could, if you want to visualize, you just take a piece of wire shaped like an S, you take either end and you bend them inverse to one another. You have the force vector of magnetism. This, of course, extrapolates out mass and magnitude. In other words, and you were taught this in school, the same thing I was, and it's the one thing that the idiot scientists got correct, is, well, every atom is 99, well, they're partially correct. Their observation is correct, but their statement is incorrect. Every atom is 99.999999% empty space. Well, space is not a thing. It doesn't have any properties. What they mean is there's nothing there in the concrete atomistic sense. Of course, the nucleus would be a super small packet inside of a giant balloon, if you will, a super, super tiny packet. But that volume of the atomic diameter measured in picometers is magnetodielectricity that makes up the volume. In other words, every atom in the entire universe and everything that comprises mass and magnitude only has mass and therefore magnitude. And when you have mass and magnitude, you have something that has no existence of itself. It exists conventionally, but not ultimately, but you have time. But everything that has mass and magnitude is, of course, due to one thing and one thing only, and that is magnetism. Magnetism and dielectricity are, of course, a conjugate pair, kind of like yin and yang, and they're no different than talking and classifying ice and water as two different things, but of course ice and water are not two different things. They're temperature pressure modalities of the one single thing, which is, of course, water. Magnetism and dielectricity, of course, are one and the same thing. But the universe is holographic. It's ultimately not real. It's a projection. And from this, using retroductive analysis, we can actually make a really long series of extrapolations and bold statements, which are quite eye-openers. And there are more statements that I could actually make from that retroductive extrapolation than I could ever put in one video. But you end up with time and antinomies, as I said, of course, already, that time doesn't exist ultimately. It exists conventionally. All empirical beings, i.e. life, creatures, swim in the sea of time. For us, of course, time is absolutely real. But, of course, it has no ultimate existence. You can't bend. This is the reason why, and the only reason why Nikola Tesla, the only time Nikola Tesla lost his cool, if you will, the only time he ranted and raved, literally the only time in recorded history of the knowledge of Nikola Tesla, was railing against Einstein and quantum BS and its reification of time having properties. Tesla said this is lunacy and stupidity. It used to be the case, and the ancient Indians talked about this, they call it the rope snake experiment, where actually something that was completely unreal caused real results. If you actually frighten someone to death about a monster, like a little child, if they do certain things in the night, the monster is going to get them. I mean, the child could actually literally be so scared that he could fall down the stairs and, seriously hurt or kill himself. So here we have the case where something that absolutely does not exist causes real results. And the same is true of time. Time actually has attributes just like a shadow. Shadow is not a thing. There's no such thing as a shadow. What do you mean there's no such thing as a shadow? It means a shadow has no principality. A shadow, of course, is merely the absence of light, but since human beings love to conceptualize and pigeonhole things, we think a shadow is a thing. Shadow is not a thing. It's an absence of light. It's a posterior attribute reification issue, and of course this gets into metaphysics and the actual thought processes of actually identifying, classifying things as so far as what they are, things that exist and things that only exist conventionally, and of course time only exists conventionally. But mass and magnitude breeds time and antinomies, and by antinomies I mean birth and death, you know, a tall person, a short person, a fat person, a skinny, everything that actually breeds envy, suffering, regret, hatred, love, all the things that you think make up the best part of life. These are the antinomies, and man, Aristotle and Plato love to talk about the antinomies. All of these things breed the antinomies. When you actually have magnitude and mass, you have time, and when you have time, you have antinomies. Also, too, when you have mass and magnitude, you have antinomies. Magnetism is, of course, the holographic matrix of ontos, of being. This empirical existence is not real. I forget which metaphysician said this. Someone will remind me. I can't remember his name because I'm not good with names. Human beings think that they're empirical beings or living beings that have spiritual experiences once in a rare while. And it's just the opposite. That's truly the case. Entities are spiritual beings that have bodily experiences. We're actually having a bodily experience, but we're spiritual beings, not the other way around. I had a spiritual experience. Like, no, you're a spiritual being that has a bodily experience. It's kind of a perfect analogy there. Time and antinomies, of course, are bad. When you actually have time, then you actually have birth, old age, death, and decay. You have the antinomies of sickness and health. You have the antinomies of every antinomy that is both desired and hated, and both of these ultimately are just antinomies of existence, and both of them are equally bad. That's why the ancient Pali says adukham asukham, which means neither suffering nor bliss, and it's in reference to the absolute, or standing in the absolute, or the agathon in the ancient Greek. Adukham asukham, neither antinomy of being, because people are wrapped up in the, I'm suffering right now, I'd love to feel bliss. I'm in bliss, I'd like to stay in bliss. I'm in suffering, I want to get out of suffering as soon as possible. These antinomies of the round of being that are connected with the antinomies, time, mass, and magnitude, that of course are the basis for all suffering, that are the basis of samsara. The Pali ancient word for samsara literally means to go round and round and round. And it's also the basis for the word nirvana. The word I know you've heard the word nirvana, but nirvana just literally means freed from or opposite of turning, of becoming. Nirvriti, or nisbandhu, from the bondage of becoming. But you know, earlier in life, I mean, as a truth seeker, always, at least most all of my life, as far back as I can remember, even way before being a teenager, superficially the holographic, and I collect holograms, by the way, too, true art holograms, and of course the most holographic thing that we have is that supercell. I mean, there's some true holography. You know, the liquid is only a few microns thin, but because of the light and the nature of the magnetic field, when you actually hold a supercell in your hands and look at it, you feel like you're looking at 5 inches of holographic depth, even though it's infinitely thinner than a human hair. The magnetic field relative to the ferrite particles and the interaction with the light that actually paints, if you will, the toroidal magnetic field structure of the conjugate geometry of both magnetism and dielectricity and their interplay of the magnetic field as seen underneath the supercell. The universe is undeniably holographic. I don't know if you know how a hologram is made. You know, where it's split, and you actually have a reference beam, and you actually have the beam that's actually bounced off, reflected off of the target object, and they both create convergence and divergence patterns in the case of an old type of hologram creation. Convergence and divergence, constructive and destructive interference on the photographic film in the case of true film holography, which is the coolest and the best. They actually have digital holograms now, which of course are a lot more accurate and a lot sharper. I don't know if you've ever seen a true hologram before, but like the hologram on your credit card, a true art hologram looks about 1,000 times better than this. There used to be a hologram store in Las Vegas. I wished it was still around. I know the guy that used to run it. If you could see what true art holograms look like, your mind would be blown. They're absolutely fantastic. But absolutely every evidence, retroductive logic and analysis, and everything that is known about the Antinomies and everything throughout both Greek, Indian, and Egyptian metaphysics states that unequivocally everything of the objective phenomenal world is a holographic mirage, a phantasm, a falsehood of ultimate reality. Time ultimately doesn't exist. It is only a measure. There is no such thing as time. Time absolutely does not exist. Magnetism is just none other than the three-dimensional force vector of the loss of energy or inertia that defines dielectricity. And these two, of course, the conjugate geometries of the universe. The geometries of force and motion, i.e. magnetism, and the geometry of inertia and acceleration, i.e. dielectricity. Centrifugal divergence and centripetal convergence. The centrifugal convergence that actually makes up the toroidal geometry of the force vector of the entire universe, and the actual volume of every atom that makes up the volume of every entity and every objective reality throughout the universe, is wholly unreal. That mass, magnitude, and volume is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. In other words, it is the wake front leftover of the loss of energy or inertia that defines what magnetism is, which is, of course, magnetism is the dielectric field, as Faraday said. There is nothing that runs even 1% contradictory to this, and the universe is absolutely holographic. And the implications of that for the retroductive statements that can be made that are undeniably accurate are nearly infinite. It tells you everything not only about fields, it tells you everything about metaphysics. Human beings are extremely unintelligent animals. We think all of this crap, is the real. And it's the exact opposite of the real. All hardcore monistic metaphysicians who are true experts of both wisdom and understanding, be that Proclus, Plotinus, Numenius, Syrianus, Pythagoras, Dr. Ananda Kitish Kumaraswamy, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Algis Udavinis, Julius Evola to a certain degree, they all agree with this position because it is both accurate, wise, and absolutely undeniable. There's 5 formal books on the holographic universe. They kind of stab at a few good points. I have all of them. But they never really strike to the heart of the matter of what is, the nature and implications of the holographic universe. And that's kind of unfortunate that someone could write a big-ass book on the holographic universe and really never get to the pithy point of it. What's the meat and bones of the implications and what is meant by the holographic universe. I'd love to extrapolate on this a whole lot further, but I feel like I'd be going a little too broadly afield or launch off the cliff of simplex analytics of talking about the nature of the magnetic field, the nature of the holographic wake front of a divergent field. How do we then therefore reify space itself? Because space has no properties, it only has attributes like a shadow. A shadow is not a thing, a shadow doesn't exist, but if you stand in a shadow you feel cold. So a shadow has attributes, but it's not a thing. So space has countless attributes, none of which are good. None of which are good, but they have a lot of attributes, but no properties. It doesn't exist ultimately. You can't bend time or space either. Time is a measure and space is not a thing. Einsteinian and quantum nonsense about warped space-time, and we all grew up with this crap in science fiction, is a phantasm. You can't no easier bend space and time than you could a unicorn fart and a weigh a pot of leprechaun gold. I mean, these things, leprechaun gold, I was about to say. These things don't exist at all. They're conceptual phantasms. They're conceptual reifications of things that don't exist that we try to classify and pigeonhole. Anyway, I hope you have a great week. Bye.